There are moments in life when love is present, but hidden behind silence, anger, or fear. This is the story of a boy and his father, two people who cared deeply for each other, yet were divided by a wall of misunderstanding. It is about a camera, a broken dream, and the quiet power of seeing someone not with your eyes, but through your heart. Ethan was 18. A boy on the edge of becoming a man, carrying with him a restless passion that burned brighter than his father could ever understand. While his friends spent afternoons playing basketball or scrolling endlessly through their phones, Ethan wandered the streets with an old battered camera slung around his neck. He would crouch down to capture raindrops clinging to rusted fences, freeze moments of laughter between strangers, or frame the golden light that spilled through their small kitchen window every morning. Photography was not just a hobby to emit, it was the language he used to make sense of the world. But to his father, Robert, photography was nothing but a distraction, a luxury, a waste of precious time. Robert was a man molded by hardship, his hands calloused from decades of hard labor, his back bent but unbroken. He believed in survival, in security, in choosing a path that guaranteed stability. To him, a future was built with sweat, not with dreams. And so when he saw Ethan hunched over that camera instead of his textbooks, his chest tightened with frustration. He feared his son was walking straight into disappointment. Between them grew a quiet war. Their home echoed, not with warmth, but with arguments small at first, then louder, sharper, cutting deeper each time. Robert accused Ethan of being irresponsible. Ethan accused Robert of never listening. And in the middle of it all sat the old camera, the object that carried Ethan's dreams but stood as the symbol of Robert's disapproval. Neither of them knew then that this very camera, the one that caused so many fights, would one day capture a moment so raw, so revealing, that it would break the wall between them. A single photograph taken in silence would hold more truth than all the words. They had shouted at each other. This is their story. Robert had never been a man of many words. His life was written not in books or journals, but in the deep lines, etched across his weathered face, in the stiffness of his shoulders, in the silence he carried when he returned home each evening. He had grown up poor, the son of a farmer who worked the land until his hands split and bled. Robert had inherited those hands, rough, strong, uncomplaining. He knew the meaning of exhaustion more than the meaning of rest. When Ethan was born, Robert made himself a silent vow. His son would never have to suffer the same way. He would study, earn a degree, and find a career that put a roof over his head and food on his table. Robert believed that safety came only from stability, and stability came only from sacrifice. Dreams in his mind were luxuries for people who could afford them, poor people unlike him. But Ethan was different. From the moment he was old enough to hold a pencil, he was sketching shapes on scraps of paper, fascinated by the way shadows fell across a room. When Robert bought an old second-hand camera at a yard sale intending only to capture a few family photos, Ethan immediately claimed it as his own. At 12, he was already wandering around their small town, experimenting with angles, fascinated. By the way, light could turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. By 18, the camera had become an extension of him. He carried it everywhere, to school, to the park, to the grocery store. Sometimes he would wake before dawn just to catch the first light crawling over the rooftops. He had filled boxes with printed photos, portraits of neighbors, snapshots of old buildings, candid shots of his mother before she passed away. But what moved him most were the pictures of his father, taken in secret. Robert fixing a broken chair, standing by the window in silence, or coming home after work with weariness clinging to his frame. Ethan saw beauty in those moments, though. He never dared to show them to his father. Their house, however, had become a battleground. Ethan, Robert would say, his voice tight with disapproval, "You can't spend all your time behind that thing. You need to focus on your studies. You want to end up broke, wandering around with a camera, waiting for luck that will never come." Ethan would bristle. "Gad, it's not just a toy. It's what I want to do." I could be a photographer. I could actually make a life out of this. Robert's jaw would clench, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. A life? You think pictures will put food on the table? You think capturing sunsets is going to pay your bills? And so the cycle repeated itself, an argument that began as a spark but grew into fire. Ethan felt unseen, dismissed, as though his dreams meant nothing. Robert, on the other hand, felt terrified. He saw in his son's passion a path to ruin, and behind every harsh word was his desperate attempt to steer him toward what he thought was safety. But neither father nor son could say the truth out loud. Ethan could not admit how much it hurt to feel misunderstood, how deeply he needed his father's approval. Robert could not confess that his anger was really fear, that he was afraid of failing his son the way life had once failed him. Instead, he built a wall of words between them, each brick laid with shouting and silence. Ethan would slam his bedroom door after arguments, clutching his camera to his chest like it was the only thing that truly saw him. Robert would sit alone in the kitchen, staring at his calloused hands, convincing himself he was right, even as doubt gnawed quietly at him. For now, the camera remained whole, though fragile, just like the bond between father and son. Neither knew how easily both could break. The breaking point came on an ordinary evening, though nothing about that night would feel ordinary again. It had been a long day for Robert. His shift at the construction site had stretched well past sunset, and every muscle in his body ached as he dragged himself home. The bills on the kitchen counter seemed taller than ever, and the uncertainty of whether there would be enough work next month gnawed at his mind. He opened the door expecting quiet, perhaps a plate of leftovers. Instead, he heard the familiar clicking sound, the shutter of Ethan's camera. There, the dim light of the living room, Ethan was kneeling by the window, trying to capture the reflection of streetlights on the glass. His textbooks lay unopened on the table, their pages still crisp, as though they hadn't been touched all day. Ethan Roberts' voice was low, carrying the weight of exhaustion. Don't tell me you've been at this all evening again. Ethan didn't. Look up. I've finished what I needed to. I saw the light, and it was perfect. If I wait another second, it'll be gone. Robert's frustration swelled. He had heard variations of that excuse 100 times before. His son was always chasing light, chasing shadows, chasing something intangible while the world demanded responsibility. Perfect light won't get you into college, Robert snapped. Perfect light won't pay rent. You think the world cares about your photographs? You need to wake up, Ethan. Life is not going to wait for you. Ethan finally turned, his eyes flashing with defiance. And what if I don't want the life you're talking about? What if I don't want to spend my whole life working a job I hate just to come home tired and angry every night? The words landed like a slap. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Robert's face darkened. He stepped forward, his voice rising. You think this life is easy? You think I chose to break my back every day? I do this so you don't have to. And you stand there telling me you'd rather chase a fantasy than take the chances I never had. Ethan's grip tightened on the camera. It's not a fantasy. It's what I love. Why can't you see that? Something inside Robert snapped. His fear, his anger, his disappointment, all the emotions he had buried deep erupted in one reckless motion. He lunged forward, grabbing the camera from Ethan's hands. For a split second, Ethan's eyes widened with shock, his mouth open in protest. And then the camera slipped. It fell hard against the wooden floor, the sound sharp and final. The lens cracked. The body split at the corner. Silence followed, so loud it seemed to swallow the room whole. Ethan froze, staring at the broken pieces scattered on the floor. His breath caught in his throat. That camera had been his voice, his solace, his only way of being understood. Now it lay shattered. Robert stood there, his chest heaving, his hands still half extended as though he could take the action back. But it was too late. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. Ethan's face hardened. He knelt slowly, gathering the pieces with trembling hands. "You didn't just break the camera," he whispered, his voice tight with pain. "You broke everything." Before Robert could respond, Ethan rose and walked quickly to his room, the fragments of the camera cradled against his chest. The door slammed shut, the echo reverberating through Robert's weary bones. That night, Robert sat alone at the kitchen table, his dinner untouched, the weight of what he had done pressing heavily on him. He told himself it was necessary, that maybe Ethan would finally understand. But in the hollow quiet of the house, he couldn't ignore the gnawing ache in his chest. He hadn't just destroyed a piece of equipment, he had destroyed trust, and upstairs, Ethan lay on his bed, staring at the broken lens in his hands, tears burning his eyes. For the first time, he wondered if his father would ever see him for who he truly was. The distance between them had never felt wider. Days slipped into weeks. But the silence between Robert and Ethan did not fade. Their conversations, when they happened at all, were clipped and cold. Ethan kept to his room, often gone for hours without a word. And Robert, though he longed to knock on that door, to say something, anything, let his pride hold him back. The house felt emptier than ever. Even though both of them were still there, the broken camera sat on Ethan's desk, its cracked lens a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. Sometimes Robert would catch a glimpse of Ethan holding it, turning the pieces in his hands as if hoping it might magically fix itself. The sight pierced him in a way he could not admit, so he buried himself deeper in work, convincing himself that distance was the lesser of two evils. One evening, exhaustion weighed on Robert heavier than usual. The construction site had been brutal, that day, heat pressing down like a hammer, his foreman shouting, the ache in his back worsening with every load he carried. When he came home, the house was quiet. Ethan was not there. Robert poured himself a glass of water and lowered into the chair at the kitchen table. His eyes fell on a cardboard box tucked partly beneath the counter, its lid askew. Curiosity got the better of him. He pulled it closer, realizing it was filled with photograph stacks of prints, some carefully framed, others just loose sheets of glossy paper. He picked one up. It was a picture of their street after a rainstorm, the puddles reflecting the dusky sky. Another showed an old woman from their neighborhood feeding pigeons, her face caught in a moment of peace. There was one of children chasing a ball down the alley. Laughter frozen midair. Robert's rough fingers lingered on each image longer than he intended. These weren't just pictures. They were pieces of life, captured with an eye that saw beauty, where he had only seen routine. Then he found it, the photograph that stopped him cold. It was of himself. Robert was sitting in the worn armchair by the window, head bowed, shoulders heavy, his hands clasped together in his lap. The photo caught him in an unguarded moment, not as a worker, not as a stern father, but as a man. The shadows carved the lines of his face, the faint light brushing against his profile with almost reverence. His eyes looked tired, yes, but behind the exhaustion was something deeper, quiet strength, a stubborn kind of dignity. Robert's throat tightened. He had never thought of himself as anything worth capturing. He was just a man trying to get through each day, to put food on the table, to make sure his son had what he needed. Yet here, through Ethan's lens, he looked human, vulnerable, important. His hand trembled as he held the photo closer. For the first time, he wondered what Ethan had seen in that moment, what had compelled him to lift the camera and preserve it. Did his son admire him, pity him, love him? The thought was too much. His eyes blurred, and before he knew it, tears slid down his cheeks, hot and unfamiliar. Robert pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, ashamed. He could not remember the last time he had cried. Perhaps not since Ethan's mother had passed away. But this photograph had stripped away the armor he had worn for so long. It showed him the truth he had refused to face. Ethan had not been wasting his time. He had been seeing the world and his father in ways Robert had never allowed. Himself too, as he sifted through more pictures, Robert saw himself again in smaller ways. His silhouette against the workshop door, his hands gripping a mug of coffee, his back turned as he fixed the fence. Ethan had been watching him all along, not with judgment, but with reverence. Each photo whispered the words Ethan had never spoken out loud. I see you. I love you. Robert's chest ached with regret. He thought of the night he had broken the camera, of Ethan's eyes filled with hurt, of the words his son had said, "You broke everything." And Robert realized with painful clarity how true those words were. He placed the photographs gently back into the box, his tears still wet on his cheeks. For the first time in years, Robert felt smaller than the silence that filled the house. He knew then that he had to change, that he had to bridge the gap, no matter how wide it seemed, because beneath all the anger and fear, there was something stronger: love. It had always been there, even when he had buried it under discipline and demands. And now, staring at his son's photographs, Robert knew he couldn't let it remain unspoken any longer. The next morning, Robert woke earlier than usual. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The box of photographs still tucked away where he had left it. He had hardly slept, replaying the images over and over. In his mind, each one had chipped away at the wall he had built between himself and Ethan, till there was nothing left but raw guilt and an ache he could no longer ignore. When Ethan finally came downstairs, his eyes were tired, the kind of tired that came not from sleepless nights, but from carrying hurt too long. He moved quietly, reaching for a piece of toast without meeting his father's gaze. Robert cleared his throat. His voice felt thick, uncertain. "Ethan, can we talk?" Ethan froze, his hand halfway to the butter knife. He didn't look up right away, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the storm inside him. "About what?" he asked flatly. Robert hesitated. He had always been a man who solved problems with action, not words. But words were all he had now. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." Ethan reluctantly slid into the chair, folding his arms across his chest. The distance between them felt vast, though it was only the width of the table. Robert drew a slow breath. "I found your photographs." At that, Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "You went through my stuff." "I didn't mean to pry," Robert said quickly. "The box was there. I looked." And Ethan, his voice faltered. He struggled for the right words, the words that could hold the weight of what he felt. "They're incredible." Ethan blinked, stunned into silence. He had braced for criticism, for another dismissal. Praise was the last thing he expected. Robert pressed on, his tone low, almost ashamed. "I saw the pictures you took of me. I don't know why you'd want to take them, but I saw something in them. Something I've never seen in myself." His hands tightened around the mug. "You see me in a way I didn't think anyone could." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then, slowly, his voice broke through the silence. "That's what I've been trying to tell you, Dad. Photography isn't just pointing a camera. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. You'll think I waste my time, but it's the only way I know how to hold on to things. To you, to Mom, to everything that matters." The mention of Ethan's mother hung heavy in the air. Robert's chest tightened. He had tried so hard to bury that grief, to focus only on survival. Hearing her name in Ethan's trembling voice cracked something open inside him. "I just didn't want you to get hurt," Robert admitted, his words spilling out rough and uneven. "The world doesn't make room for dreamers, Ethan. I've lived long enough to see how it chews people up. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, if I forced you to be practical, I could save you from that pain." Ethan's eyes softened though. His voice still carried hurt. "But don't you see? You've been hurting me anyway? Not because you don't care, but because you won't listen. All I ever wanted was for you to believe in me, even if the world did and single quotes too." The truth of it landed heavy between them. Robert looked down, his vision blurring. For so long he had mistaken silence for strength, criticism for guidance. He hadn't realized how much his son had needed his faith, not his fear. "I'm sorry," Robert whispered. The words unfamiliar but true. "I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to cling to his anger to the wall he had built to shield himself. But the cracks were already forming, and behind them was the father he had longed for. "I don't need you to understand everything about photography," he said quietly. "I just need you to understand." Robert finally met his son's gaze. For the first time in years, neither looked away. And in that fragile, unsteady moment, something shifted. The distance was still there, but the bridge had begun to form. The next few days carried a fragile calm. Robert and Ethan spoke a little. More simple things. Ordinary things, but beneath every word was the unspoken acknowledgement that something between them had shifted. The arguments had quieted, but the scars still lingered. Visible in the hesitation of their voices, the way they moved around each other carefully, as if afraid the silence might break again. Robert knew words alone would not be enough. Apologies were powerful, yes, but they could not erase the sound of shattering glass. The image of Ethan's face when the camera had hit the floor. He needed to show his son that this time, his actions would match his words. One evening, while Ethan was out with friends, Robert crept into his room. The broken camera still sat on the desk, its cracked lens tilted like a wounded eye. Robert picked it up gently, almost reverently. The weight of it surprised him. He remembered the anger that had ripped it from Ethan's hands, the way it had crashed to the floor. Holding it now, he felt the shame all over again. The next morning, before work, Robert carried the camera into town. The photography shop was a small, cluttered place tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose. "Can I help?" "You?" The man asked. Robert placed the camera carefully on the counter. "It's broken," he said gruffly. "Can it be fixed?" The man inspected it with practiced hands, tilting the cracked lens, turning the scratched body. He frowned thoughtfully. "It's seen better days." "But yes, it can be repaired. Won't be cheap, though." Robert nodded without hesitation. "Do it." As the man began writing up the order, Robert lingered by the counter, staring at the camera. "Belongs to my son," he admitted quietly. I broke it." The man glanced up, then offered a kind smile. "Well, fixing it might mean more than you realize." For the first time in weeks, Robert felt a flicker of hope. 2 weeks later, the call came. The camera was ready. Robert picked it up after work, the repaired lens gleaming, the body polished like new. He ran his fingers over it, surprised by the swell of pride and relief inside him. He couldn't wait to see Ethan's face. That evening, he found his son in the living room, sorting through more prints. Ethan looked up as Robert entered, his expression guarded. "I have something for you," Robert said. His voice carried an unsteady mixture of nerves and anticipation. He set the box on the table and slid it toward Ethan. Ethan hesitated before lifting the lid. His breath caught when he saw the camera whole again. His hands trembled as he lifted it out, turning it over, almost disbelieving. "You fixed it?" Ethan whispered. Robert nodded. "I did. I should never have broken it in the first place. I can't undo that. But I wanted to try, at least, to make it right." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He just held the camera, his eyes glistening. Then, slowly, a smile broke through, the first genuine smile Robert had seen from him in months. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan said softly. "You don't know how much this means to me." Robert swallowed hard. "I think I'm starting too." The silence that followed was not heavy this time, but gentle, filled with something unspoken yet understood. For the first time, Robert felt he had given his son more than rules or lectures. He had given him respect. Later that night, Ethan snapped a picture of his father. As he sat in his chair reading the newspaper, the camera clicked, the sound crisp and alive again. Robert looked up, startled, then chuckled quietly. "Just make sure you don't make me look too old," Ethan grinned. "No promises." And in that small exchange, father and son began writing a new story together, not through anger, but through acceptance, trust, and the simple act of seeing one another clearly. Time did not erase the cracks overnight, but it softened them. Robert and Ethan began to find a rhythm again, one built not on shouting and slammed doors, but on quiet respect. Their conversations grew longer, warmer. Sometimes they argued, of course, but the words no longer carried the same sharp edge. They were learning, both of them, that love was not about control or obedience, but about trust. Ethan spent more and more afternoons outside with his camera, now whole again. Robert no longer scolded him for it. Instead, he asked questions, tentative at first, then with growing curiosity. "What do you see in that shot?" he'd ask, leaning over Ethan's shoulder. Or, "Why that angle instead of another?" Ethan would explain light, shadow, emotion, and Robert would listen, surprised at how much he enjoyed hearing the world through his son's eyes. Sometimes, Ethan even asked Robert to come along. They would walk together through the neighborhood, Robert carrying the grocery bags while Ethan trailed a few steps behind, snapping photos of doorways, of children playing, of Robert himself when he wasn't looking. At first, Robert grumbled at being the subject, but secretly, he didn't mind. Each click of the camera reminded him of the night he had wept over those hidden photographs, the night he had finally understood his son. One evening, Ethan showed him a portfolio he had been assembling, the best of his photographs printed and bound in a simple folder. Robert turned each page slowly, his chest swelling with a mixture of pride and awe. The images weren't just pictures, they were stories, captured moments that spoke louder than words ever could. "You've got something here," Robert admitted, his voice low but steady. "Something real." Ethan's smile was quiet, grateful. "I just wanted you to see what I see." Robert nodded, his throat tight. "I do now. I do." For Ethan, that was all he had ever wanted. Life remained imperfect. Bills still piled up, Robert's body still ached from long days. And Ethan still faced an uncertain future in a field that was anything but stable. But something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer opponents standing on opposite sides of a wall. They were allies, walking forward together. Even if the path ahead was unclear, the broken camera, once a symbol of anger and division, had become something else entirely. It was proof that even when trust is shattered, it can be mended. Love, though tested, can survive. That's sometimes to understand one another. We don't need more words, we just need to see. And as Ethan lifted his camera one evening to take another photo of his father, Robert didn't flinch or scowl. He simply looked into the lens, offering a faint smile. For the first time, he allowed himself to be seen, not just as a provider, not just as a man worn by life, but as a father, imperfect and human, deeply loved by his son. The shutter clicked. A moment was captured. A wound was healed. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people in your own life, the ones you love, but sometimes struggle to understand. Maybe it's a parent who seems too strict. Maybe it's a child whose dreams feel too distant from your own. Or maybe it's simply someone you've grown apart from, even though you never stopped caring. The truth is, misunderstandings are a part of every family. We argue, we clash, we hurt each other with words we never really mean. But behind all of that, love is still there waiting for a chance to be seen. Sometimes all it takes is a single moment, a gesture, a small step toward listening instead of judging. Robert and Ethan found that moment through a broken camera and a hidden photograph. For you, it might come in another formal letter, a conversation, even just a hug. What matters is not perfection, but connection. So tonight, I want to leave you with a question. Who in your life needs to be seen, truly seen by you? And are you willing to look not with your eyes, but with your heart? If this story reminded you of someone, share it with them. Share it with your family, your friends, anyone who might need a gentle reminder that love can bridge even the widest gaps. And if you've ever experienced something like this, if you've ever found healing in an unexpected way, leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else to take that first step, because in the end, we all want the same thing: to be understood, to be accepted, to be loved.